Today, I have a very special guest, and I'm honored, Barbara Vacarr, former CEO of Kripalu. Barbara, welcome.
Mm, Thank you. It's so good to be here with you, Ray.
We've worked together when you were CEO of Kripalu. I was also teaching there, and I've seen your work in the world, the impact that you want to have and you do have in sharing these teachings. So I would say a simple or maybe a very deep and complicated question: how have these practices, or which of the practices has really impacted your life and changed the way you view the world in your everyday life?
So I think when you ask the question, what comes to mind is the evolution of practice. And, I'm still practicing, right? And will continue to practice. But when I think about the evolution of my practice, I think back to the early years of what I thought of as practice. And I really see myself as someone who was seeking and doing. It was very, very busy. Um, but I think in the early days, the practice was really designed to help me navigate in a world that felt overwhelming, felt like somehow the sky opened one day and I fell here, and somehow I was supposed to manage, and the practices were there to help me manage. And I look back at that, I feel such compassion for that now. I took it very seriously then, and needed to, because it was a way of navigating in the world. Um, I think about my practices now more as having evolved into just a way of being that
Mm.
I would say more and more invites me to be more present, to be more here, but also invites me to be here more fully in a way that is compassionate to myself. And what I've noticed is that as I've become more present, um, more in compassion, more whole, more fully who I am, that it tends to invite others to do the same without having to work very hard at it. It sort of opens a doorway.
That's beautiful. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Mm.
And of all practices, I know you've had several practices in your life, meditation and yoga and more. What would you share? What would you like to share, for example, beginning from the yoga practice?
Yes. So for me, the breath is at the heart of all of the practices that have made a difference. And when I think about the core practice, whether it's yoga or Buddhist walking meditation or Sufi dancing, for me, it is the way the breath connects and integrates my being with um, the language is so linear. I was going to say with that which is around me, but in fact it is one, and the breath is what allows me to experience that. So I would say that breath work has been at the heart of all of my practices, and I was a seeker. I, was in a Buddhist community, in a Sufi community, practiced yoga, um, and in a spiritual Jewish community. Studied for a little while with Rabbi Zalman Schachter, and was very much sort of looking at spiritual intimacy. But at the heart of all of the practices that have invited me more and more to be fully here, to be more fully myself, the breath is the connector. It is the way I feel more embodied and more at one with all. Yeah,
Everything. That is beautiful.
yeah. And I'm a runner.
And
And I'm a runner. Running
oh
is
wow, I didn't know
probably, yes.
that.
And running, I would say running is one of um, my favorite practices.
I love that. And what I find running is that it's really meditative. It brings
Yes,
one into a state of meditation.
yes,
Is that true
yes.
for you too?
It absolutely. And something happens also to my observing self when I'm running. Things become crystal clear. I know without thinking I'm doing it, there'll be some epiphany after running. And I didn't even know I was thinking about whatever that thing was. But running is incredibly meditative and I think has really strengthened my observing self. I'll give you an example. I remember running one day and it was one of those runs where I was really in the flow and I stopped. I was in the woods and I stopped and I looked around me and I was able to see, it's hard, words don't quite capture it, but I was able to see that which we impose our perception and then the experience of what was real.
For me, I've noticed, and I felt for many years before I took my deepest dive into the work, the last over 20 years in yoga and working with the shamans. It's like, I thought that life was happening around me.
Yes.
And it was outside of me and only outside of me. So when something difficult would come up, it would be like, oh, why is this happening to me? And then through yoga and through the work with the shamans, I started realizing that, wait a minute, this is interactive.
Yes.
And then I said, wait a minute, a lot of what I'm seeing, I am, what's the word you use? Imposing, or
Yes.
I was imposing it on the space around me.
Yes. You just made me think of something else, if I may, Ray. When you asked about my practices, I think there was a pivotal moment in my life around the practice that deepened, I would say that expanded my consciousness and deepened my experience of being that unitive experience. And it was, I was a therapist. I am a therapist, I am a healer, but I'm not practicing as a therapist in this moment. And it was sitting in what I have come to really know as the sacred container of this intimate relationship with another human being, where I understood that if I were there thinking while they were speaking, that I was not present with myself or with them at all. That the practice, the therapy practice, became the practice of complete and total presence and complete and total trust that whatever was going to emerge was going to emerge from the virtue of being fully present. And I remember when my clients would come in, this practice that I had of starting to breathe with them, just matching my breathing to theirs. And then, slowly and more consciously slowing my breath down and becoming aware of the sort of connectivity of how we began to breathe together. And the practice of full presence and recognizing that that's what heals, that the illusion is of our separateness. And that when we can be like in running, in that moment of flow, of being fully present, I didn't have to think about what I was going to say or do. What I was going to say or do was there to be spoken or done. I didn't have to act upon the relationship or the environment.
Wow, that is really profound. What you just said, that to be fully present and breathe with my client, breathe with the person I'm with, reminds me of Patanjali's sutra in the Yoga Sutras, which says, where chitta goes, prana follows.
Yes.
Where focus goes, life force appears. So it's almost like I truly heard you say now, when I breathe with my clients, the healing surrounds us, because that's
Yes. And for me, healing is the process of creating wholeness. I mean, I think about what Jung said about healing being the process of wholeness and coming into wholeness. And in that kind of presence, that was the experience of being at one with, in a way that everything feels more complete. I would also say that the it's probably not the right word, but the irony in that is that the vulnerability that is required is is huge, is just huge. And when I mean vulnerability, I mean it's like taking your clothes off because here I am, right? So this is, I don't have, you call it the narrator. I'm not going to rely on the narrator. So I'm just going to be here open, and I might not know what to say. I'm going to trust that if I'm really here, whatever needs to happen will.
I find that to be beautiful, and I really appreciate it that you're sharing this. It's because that is the only truth. It's like, and I think that's what holds us from being real and from being whole. That if I show myself, if I what holds us is the vulnerability. If I am vulnerable to be without in my naked truth, I might not be enough. I might not be accepted. I might not be. I might be wrong.
And we're all kind of wounded in that way, you know, when I think about how our sense of ourself gets sort of constructed, right? So in earliest childhood, we construct this self out of all of the messages that we've taken in. And those messages become like limiting filters that really keep us from knowing our full selves. And I think about this a lot. In order to not have the threat of being at odds with how others see us, we incorporate how they see us into who we are. And sometimes parts of ourselves become inaccessible, or we forget those parts of ourselves. And for me, the whole process of spiritual practices is of really opening up to seeing and being the self that is not limited by those perceptions, by the distortion of perception, which is so much smaller than who we are.
That is true, and that is beautiful too. So in essence, all spiritual practices, or these spiritual practices, really lead us to become more who we truly are,
Yes.
and allow that to be seen. So
Yes.
I love that, and I could not agree more with you that in order to engage with life, the more we breathe, to start from that you said about breath
Yes.
being like a practice that is no other, that really
Yes.
brings us present. It's in essence almost like the physical communing with reality, with what seems to be outside and the inside. I'm
Yes.
inhaling this outside world, and I'm exhaling my inside world out, and there's
Yes.
this beautiful conversation.
Yes. Yes. And then opening up, right? Opening up to really seeing. And there is this relationship for me between seeing and being, that it is very hard to fully be myself without seeing myself. And, you know, I think that's one of the ways that teachers have been very important in my life, is that in the mirror of their eyes, I was able to see myself. And if they were really good teachers, their mirrors were really clean. Yes.
without, without their projections.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
beautiful. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. You did amazing things for Kapalu, for the communities, for the people that worked inside. It's just like a lot of breathing. It felt like a
A
lot of
lot of
breathing.
breathing.
And a lot of and we're both now we're looking back at it, and it's a beautiful, beautiful chapter and a beautiful gift to the world. I feel that Kripalu is, and witnessing you hold the space that you were making spiritual work accessible to many people, to thousands of people. What do you feel that where we're headed, places like Kripalu or Omega, SLN, where do you think that should be headed, or what is the role in the world for
Yeah.
these spaces?
So I feel such passion and conviction around this. It's such the right question to ask me at this moment. Um, the world needs the wisdom, traditions, and spiritual practices now more than ever before. And when I say that, we have to not just sing to the choir, they have to be accessible to people who are searching now, seeking, and may not even know it, But because of the complexity and the pain that humanity and our planet is suffering right now, I believe that the wisdom practices and traditions and teachings need to be accessible. And one of the conundrums, one of the things that I was concerned about was that the centers, the spiritual centers, sit inside of the same systems that cause a lot of our disconnection and our alienation. And so if you think about competition, if you think about the way that our world is siloed, and so we brand ourselves and we figure out what our distinction is, and then we sell ourselves, and then we compete with those who are doing the same thing. About the power of the spiritual centers and about connected support and connected impact for a world right now that needs it more than ever. And so the big question is, how do we let go of the structures that hold us in these units enough so that we can really be thinking together about how do we leverage the programs, whatever you want to call them, the offerings of this center and this institute and that school. How do we leverage that in a way where we're not afraid that if we open ourselves to really connecting and sharing, that we will lose what we have, or it will make less what we have, rather than to understand that right now, coming together is the way to create the abundance that we need in order to be able to have much wider access to the kinds of teachings and practices that are held in a very privileged way in centers that compete with each other. Yeah, I mean, we collaborate on programs, but for the most part, we are, sort of all worried about our own bottom lines. And I would love to see this sector be at the leading edge, take the risk, be vulnerable, to let go of holding on out of fear that we will lose who we are, in order to embrace that we can be something so much bigger and more effective and impactful, and offer much greater support in a world and a planet that really needs it now desperately.
That is so true and so beautiful, so beautifully said.
Mhm.
I feel
Mhm.
it's like almost like you're saying earlier, it's like if I want to be connected spiritual with the world, I have to be who I am. It's like being that vulnerability. And it's almost like in a bigger scale, may these centers, yoga centers, universities of spiritualism, may they open up, collaborate more,
Yes.
be vulnerable.
Yes.
And then that becomes, it
Yes.
breaks down the silo, said,
That's right.
allowing it
So it's sort of
for the
saying, what do you have that would enhance or take further what I have? And how do we put that together in a way that people can create lifelong paths for themselves? And we know at different times in our lives, we need different practices, or we need to lean into different wisdom traditions. And so how do we make it available in a way that it becomes bigger when we open rather than smaller?
That is beautiful, bigger and more accessible to many. So it's not, again, just a
Yes,
smaller percentage of people that can actually approach
yes,
it.
yes.
Well,
Yeah,
Barbara,
that's my
thank you.
dream.
Well, I'm co-dreaming here with you in creating a world that the collective consciousness becomes more a collective enlightenment, a collective awakening. So a collective awakening, it's all we need really, to be
That's what we
awakened
need.
and to be breathing together and be present when we're listening and talking to each other to create a beautiful, different world. Barbara, thank you. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you. Thank you,
coming for
Ray.
this interview. Beautiful
Thank
to
you.
know your interviews of this world. I wish you the best for the next chapter. I won't ask a question about that.
Good.
Maybe in the next chapter, we'll do another interview.
It's emerging.
when it emerges. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be working with you so many years, and a pleasure
Thank you.
to have you in
Same here,
this.
Ray. Yes.
Namaste and
Namaste.
wishes for your spirit
Mm,
and your family.
thank you. Thank you.